All right, good afternoon. The head of the Peacekeeping Department, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, briefed the Security Council this morning on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He told Council members that it was more necessary than ever for the national political parties and international partners to be mobilized in order to put the 31st December 2016 agreement back on track. On the security front, he noted that instability persists in a number of areas in the east and the west, with the violence in the Kasaï provinces reaching disturbing levels. In response to these developments in the Kasaï provinces, the UN mission has established a small and mobile presence in various locations to help protect civilians. However, despite these efforts, disturbing reports of human rights violations and abuses continue to be received on a daily basis. Mr. Lacroix said in the current financial context, it will be critical to ensure that the mission makes the best possible use of the resources placed at its disposal by focusing on a limited set of key priorities. The strategic review of the mission is underway, and the Council will be presented with options as requested by the 30th of September. And you will have seen we issued a statement last night in which the Secretary General welcomed the establishment of a new political mission in Colombia. The mission is tasked with verifying the commitments in the peace agreement relating to the reintegration of the FARC-EP and the implementation of security guarantees for the group and conflict-affected communities. The UN verification mission in Colombia will begin its activities on September 26th. And today marks the 22nd anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre, the largest atrocity on European soil since the founding of the United Nations. In a statement by the Secretary General that was issued to mark the day, we remember and honor the thousands of men and boys who were slaughtered and express our solidarity with the families and friends of those whose lives were taken. The terrible events that occurred in Srebrenica in July of 1995 are historical facts that have been documented extensively. Both the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Court of Justice have concluded that the acts committed at Srebrenica constituted genocide. To help prevent future atrocities, we must look honestly at the past and acknowledge that these crimes occurred and our roles in allowing them to occur. The Secretary General's statement is online. And regarding Iraq, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad al-Hussein, said today that the retaking of Mosul from Daesh by Iraqi government forces, supported by their international coalition partners, marks a significant turning point in the conflict. But he added that Iraq faces a series of human rights challenges which, if left unaddressed, are likely to spark further violence and civilian suffering. With Mosul now reclaimed, the extent of Daesh violations and abuses have become even more evident. Information gathered by the UN Human Rights Office strongly suggests that international crimes may have been perpetrated by Daesh during the 3 years that the group was in control, not only of Mosul, but in large areas of Iraq. Horrific though the group's crimes are, there is no place for vengeance, the High Commissioner said. As soon as practicable after the retaking of areas from Daesh, he added that the Iraqi government should ensure that their responsibility for law and order is restored to civilian control and that human rights and basic humanitarian needs of civilians in those areas are met. And from the humanitarian side, we are told that over the last 3 days, the water situation in this concerning Syria. The water situation in the Syrian city of MENBIJ and the surrounding areas has improved after the water department managed to finalize some maintenance work, found a new temporary system for water distribution. Throughout Syria, 51% of the population does not have access to the public water network, with high regional variations. Meanwhile, we continue to be deeply concerned for the safety and protection of thousands of civilians who are trapped in RAQQA as fighting and military operations in the area continue. As the fighting intensifies, airstrikes are reportedly resulting in the deaths and injuries of civilians and hindering civilian movements out of the city. Turning to Gaza, the UN country team in the occupied Palestinian territory released a report today that says the real GDP per capita in Gaza has decreased over the past decade, while the provision of health services has continued to decline and the demand for additional health clinics, doctors, and hospital beds have not been met. Thanks in large part to the scale of services provided by the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, Gaza has maintained high education standards, but average daily classroom time for students remains as low as 4 hours per day. The report calls on Israel, the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and the international community to take action towards more sustainable development investments, reinvigoration of Gaza's productive sectors, improvement of freedom of movement for both people and goods, as well as respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. Humanitarian coordinator Robert Piper warns that the alternative will be a Gaza that is more isolated and more desperate. More in the report and a press release online. And according to information released today by the UN Migration Agency, IOM, only 23 million people, representing less than 0.5% of adults worldwide, are actively preparing to migrate abroad. The countries with the highest number of adults planning to migrate abroad are Nigeria, India, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the most popular destination for those planning to migrate is the U.S., followed by the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, France, Canada, Germany, and South Africa. Adults planning to migrate are generally male, young, single, living in urban areas, and more likely to have completed at least secondary level education. And our friends at UNEP have launched a partnership with 11 of the world's leading banks to promote climate transparency in the financial markets. The banks have committed to develop analytical tools and indicators to strengthen their assessment and disclosure of climate-related risks as well as opportunities. The data obtained will be made available to companies, investors, lenders, and insurers with the aim of boosting climate-friendly investment. More information from UNEP. And today is, what is today besides Tuesday? It's World Population Day. And this year's theme is Family Planning, Empowering People and Developing Nations. In London, representatives of 37 countries, as well as businesses and civil society, are gathered at the Family Planning Summit, which has been co-hosted by UNFPA, and the Deputy Secretary General is also there. In a statement, the Acting Executive Director of UNFPA, Natalia Kanem, noted that since its creation 50 years ago, UNFPA has contributed to near doubling the use of modern contraceptives worldwide, from 36% in 1970 to 64% in 2016. She added that despite the dramatic progress, enormous challenges remain. Some 214 million women in developing countries lack modern family planning. Fulfilling their demand would save lives by averting 67 million unintended pregnancies and reducing by 1/3 the estimated 303,000 maternal deaths that occur every year. And I was asked earlier today by one of your colleagues about new settlements, the plans for new settlements that are being planned in East Jerusalem. And I can say that we have seen these reports about the advancement of plans for a large number of housing units in settlements in occupied East Jerusalem, which is alarming. We are deeply concerned that the Jerusalem District Planning Committee is reportedly set to discuss plans for additional units in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, some of which may entail evicting current Palestinian residents. Once again, we condemn all unilateral action that threaten peace and undermine the two-state solution. Mr. Klein.
Thank you. You mentioned the in-country Gaza report, and while I haven't gone through the whole thing, I noted one item in particular, the reference throughout the report to Gaza as still occupied territory, even though it's run day to day by Hamas. But in a footnote explaining that characterization, the author cites a report of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Palestinian territories. And you've said from the podium numerous times that the opinion of the Special Rapporteur is that of an independent individual, not necessarily that of the United Nations. So what I want to ask you is the Secretary General himself of the view that Gaza remains part of the quote occupied territories, occupied by Israel?
That is the view. That is the view of the United Nations. Mr. Lee.
I wanted to ask you on Cyprus, since the whatever collapse, failure, or suspension of the talks, Cyprus has announced that they intend to go forward this week with natural gas drilling with Total and ENI, and Turkey has made a statement that this would be an irresponsible move. I guess the threat is against the companies, not Cyprus itself, but does the UN or the special envoy have a view of whether this should go forward this week?
I don't have anything on that for you. I will try to get you an answer later today.
And I wanted to, you may or may not have a comment on this, but maybe you could get one. Since you were talking, I wasn't about World Population Day and the DSG is there. You may have seen that there was a speech by French President Emmanuel Macron at the G20 in which he said other things. It's more complicated than this, but he definitely did say that one of the things holding Africa back is women having, quote, 7 children apiece. He called it civilizational. So there's a lot of controversy online that you can find. But what I wanted to ask you is, what does the UN, given it's a P5 member, it was a major speech and a major conference where the Secretary General took part, either do you have a view of this speech, or can you ask if the Deputy Secretary General that works on these very issues
We're not going to, I haven't particularly seen the speech, we're not going to comment on it, but obviously it's clear from our point of view that women everywhere should have access to family planning services, to maternal health, and that families as a whole should have access to family planning services in the best and safest possible way.
Thank you. Stéphane, yesterday there was a terrorist attack in Jammu and Kashmir targeting pilgrims, and 7 pilgrims were killed, including women, 5 women, and police authorities in Kashmir have said that Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba was behind the attack and a Pakistani terrorist was the mastermind of the attack. Does the SG have a comment on this?
We have, I mean, you know, I would only comment on the deaths of civilians, which is to be condemned in any situation. We're obviously looking a little closer to exactly what happened. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stéphane. As you indicated, the new peace mission in Colombia will begin in a couple of months. Are there any candidates to head the mission?
As you know, when staffing announcements are ready to be made, they are made, but we're not going to comment beforehand. Yeah.
Stéphane, do you have any information about ISIS leader Baghdadi's fate? Because some reports that he's dead. And then another question on the Syria. There was some ceasefire agreement in the south, and there's still some violations reports. Do you have any information?
No, I think, as Mr. Demirstore said it himself best, there's always some teething problems when ceasefires or cessation of hostilities comes into a place. I think that's to be expected in any situation. We obviously very much hope it will hold. We welcome the agreement, and we also hope that not only will it lead to a reduction of violence for the sake of those people still living in the area, but also enable the UN and its Syrian partners, humanitarian partners, to deliver as much humanitarian aid as possible. Yeah, and nothing on al-Baghdadi. I have no way of knowing one way or another.
Thank you. As you know, the Political Forum on Sustainable Development has begun this week. And I just wanted to know, which goal does the SG feel the most worried or concerned about accomplishing, and which goal he feels the most optimistic about?
You know, I think we have to wait for the forum to finish. Mr. Hu Hongbo, I think, gave a pretty extensive briefing yesterday. Let's wait to see how the forum goes and what the conclusions are, so that countries will be presenting their own progress. Obviously, we would like to see progress across the board. Linda.
Thank you, Steph. Going back to the family planning, is that a summit or a meeting? How is it characterized?
It's a family planning summit, which I think is organized by the UK, but I should let me find out a bit more for you.
Okay, but this is my question. Doesn't a summit usually imply that all countries are invited, like the 193 countries?
I don't believe, and I will stand corrected before the end of this brief, that it is a UN summit. Obviously, in the UN jargon, we would call that a summit, but also you have the G20 summit, the G7 summit. I think, to me, summit implies that the representation is at the highest level possible. It doesn't necessarily imply universality.
But it doesn't it generally imply that everyone's been invited? The reason I'm bringing it up is I thought you said that only 37 countries were participating. So
yes, let me find out. As I said, I don't think we are not the sponsors of it, but let me let me find out. Mr. Lee.
Sure, thanks a lot. I have at least two questions. One has to do with Sudan. The country team there has put out a statement saying it, quote, looks forward to the decision that will be taken shortly on sanctions. This is a reference to the U.S.'s unilateral sanctions on Sudan. It's a matter of some controversy here. There are many people in Congress actually writing to the State Department to saying, don't remove it given the situation in Darfur. So I wanted to know, I always thought that the UN really didn't talk about sanctions. Is this statement by the country team in Sudan, was this run by DPA? Is it the UN?
I think you should refer those questions to the UN country team in Sudan.
Okay,
Next
it was
question.
official.
I'm not saying it wasn't official, but I'm saying they can speak for themselves.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you this. I've tried to hold off, but the case is moving along quickly, again, about the John Ash, may he rest in peace, and Eng Lap Seng. And the reason I'm asking you is that there's a controversy now of the defense, Mr. Eng Lap Seng's defense, wanting to use videos to cross-examine Francis Lorenzo, who's been testifying for a few days, including that he received $1 million in bribes to obtain the document that was modified by the Secretariat. And since, as you know, there were South-South news videos that made their way into the UN TV system in some way, and I know I've asked you before, I've went back and looked at it. There's 17, they're still there. They're not all having to do with habitat. Has there been any review by the UN to figure out, now that South-South news is being described every day in the Southern District of New York as a bribery conduit, how that happened? And is there any either accountability, or are they going to remain in there? What's the status? And do you believe that any of these videos will be used in court?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not involved in the case. It's not up to me to decide what's going to be used in court. As I said, we've cooperated to the best of our abilities with the prosecution, with the legal authorities here in the U.S. I think the fact at the time, I think there was an explanation for why these videos on board. And that's really all I have to say.
One final comment, just one question. You said that the UN has cooperated to the extent it could with the legal authorities, and they've complained that the list of people that were spoken to write the UN task force report, which is also a major issue in the case now, was never provided to them, and so therefore they don't want it in at all. There's a big dispute. But why was it? Can you say why it was that the UN declined to provide the list of people spoken to?
I'm not going to comment on that. Aman.
Yeah, on Mali, there's a 10 soldiers missing after ambush with after an ambush by suspected Islamists. Do you aware of it? Could you give us more detail?
We're looking into the situation.
Okay.
Joe, then Mr. Avni, then Mr. Abadi.
Yeah, back to the Gaza report. Is it fair to assume that this is regarded as an official UN report, adopted in its entirety or agreed to in its entirety by the Secretary General?
It's a report issued by the UN country team in the name of the UN country team.
And the Secretary General, because we've had issues before with other documents where the Secretary General said it didn't go through all the appropriate review processes.
Those reports were issued in his name. This is a report by the UN country team. It's their duty to report on. It's part of their work. They report this.
So he would. So it's fair to say,
what's the question before you lay out the premise?
No, I'm just trying to first of all get the appropriate characterization of a document, which does go into various factors causing the what he describes as a very serious, distressing situation in Gaza, among which it says the Hamas takeover of Gaza has had a significant impact on the legislative, judicial, and executive branches, the fact that no presidential or legislative elections have been held in Palestine since 2006 has also created a democratic deficit that undermines the legitimacy of state institutions and their actions on both sides of the divide. And, I know in your statement that you read out, there was a general call for all parties, including Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, as well as Israel, to cooperate in trying to improve the situation. But there's some very specific criticisms of Hamas in terms of its terrorist attacks, the division between the PA and Hamas, what I read you, and there are a lot of others, parallel systems, calling into question whether there is legitimacy for calling Palestine a state. So that's why I'm asking whether the Secretary General is adopting or agrees with the complete content of this document.
It's a UN report. We stand by the report, and I've read out a basic press summary of the report. I could have stood here and read out the whole report, but it would have taken a bit of time. You're obviously reading it, which is good, and you'll report on it. We'll stand by the report. And I'm told Mr. Lacroix will be at the stakeout in about 10 minutes. We still have some time for grilling. Mr. Avni.
There are several reports about new missile factories in Lebanon, built by Hezbollah and Iran. Has any of them been observed by UNIFIL?
We've asked that question of our colleagues at UNIFIL. I'm waiting for an answer. Mr. Lee.
I saw on the Secretary General's schedule that he's meeting with Mark Lowcock this evening. Is he beginning, when it says incoming, when does he actually?
I think September 1st, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so this is just a kind of a, all right. And the other one has to do with the personal envoy on Western Sahara.
Mm-hmm.
Some time has gone by. Some people are saying that there's kind of a loss of momentum, if there was any momentum. What's happening? Or does the Secretary General recognize that not having an envoy for this period of time is...
I think we would be the first ones to recognize that there's been some time. And as soon as I have something to announce, I will announce it. Obviously, we would have happy to announce it earlier, but go ahead.
Are you able to say which side? I mean, is there...
No, I think all sides, both sides have, there's been no disagreement from both sides. There's certain issues still being worked out.
And on this, I just want to ask one more time about the Myanmar and the decision by the government led by, Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi to not allow in the UN examination team.
Mm-hmm.
Many governments are saying the international community as a whole should do everything possible to get them in there, given what's happening with the Rohingya. Has the Secretary General made a call? Does he anticipate making a call?
The Secretary General believes that all countries should cooperate fully with the human rights mechanisms. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you. Is the UN making any contingency planning for the possible reconstruction of Iraq?
Definitely, I think as Ms. Grande has told you in the past, and as we hope to have her brief you, I think on Friday, we're planning to have her come in here in person at 11 o'clock on Friday. I think she will outline that the UN system is partnering up with the government of Iraq to help rebuild Mosul, help the government return basic services to Mosul. A lot of the UN support of the government has been focusing on the water system and the power grid. I think the fastest we can help the government return basic services to Mosul, people feel safe to come home, I think the better it will be for everybody. I'm told, Mr. Avni, that UNIFIL has not observed any evidence of illegal weapons transferred in its area of operations. Stefano and then Linda. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten.
Thank you. How much interest the Secretary General has on the debate if Russia, there was Russian interference on the U.S. democratic election in 2016? I mean, President Putin had denied any interference, but there are reports from intelligence that say that Russia there's been actually an interference. So if in the next days we continue to have proof of this interference, I mean, if they come out, there was going to be a reaction of the Secretary General? Is a matter of concern this or not?
I think, we have no intelligence because it's not a debate in which we're involved in. We're reading press reports as anybody else is, and I will leave it at that. Ms. Fasulo, on your question, the London summit, the UK Department of International Development, DFID, is co-hosting a global summit on family planning in London with the UN Population Fund, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in collaboration with Family Planning 2020, close partnership with the U.S. Agency for International Development and Global Affairs Canada to re-energize global commitment to one of the quote, best buys in development, rights-based family planning programs.
Thank you.
There you go.
Just quickly on that. So the question is, if there are only 37 countries participating, is that like one of the lowest participation levels?
I think, listen, we need to look at who was invited. as I said, I think to me, the term summit calls for a meeting that is at the highest possible representation. It doesn't imply universality. I mean, we have the G7 summit, which is seven heads of states invited, plus others are on the others on the guest list. Same thing for the G20 or the BRICS. I mean, summit to me is about representation of delegation. It is not about universality, but we will check in my office to see exactly how many countries were invited.
Excuse me. Thank you very much on that. Going back to the question, I have a question about migration. You said there were, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands of people who wanted to emigrate to the United States. I assume these are economic migrants. Is there a UN position in terms of the rights of economic migrants to travel to any country? And are those economic migrants equivalent to what the U.S. calls illegal immigrants?
Okay, I think we're involved in a big question here. What I said was flagged a report from the Organization of Migration, which handles migrants as opposed to refugees. I think the point that they're making is, as opposed to what may be common perception, there's very few people who are planning to migrate, right? Only 23 million people, representing less than 0.5% of adults worldwide, are actively preparing to migrate abroad. Okay, and they're, according to IOM, the top places are the UK, Saudi Arabia, US, France, South Africa, and Germany. That's the point that we're making, is that in fact the number is very low. For the UN, what is important, and this is the work that Louise Arbour is leading, is to get a global compact on how to better manage migration, which involves a dialogue with the countries of origin, the countries of transit, and the countries of destination.
But does the UN believe that economic migrants have the right from anywhere to emigrate?
There are two things. Refugees have very cleared rights under the 1951 Convention on Refugees. Migrants have the right to have their human rights respected, to be treated with compassion and within legal bounds, but they also have people have a responsibility to obey laws, and countries have the right to protect their borders and to manage migration. But what we want to see is exactly that, a migration that is managed. People are going to move, and so you need to manage it in a way that takes the power right now from the hands of criminal elements, people smugglers, to a system where governments can enter into dialogue, countries that receive migrants, countries that, where migrants come from, can manage this migration. Because people migrate, because obviously they're looking for better economic opportunities, but they also migrate because in a lot of developed countries, there is a need for labor, right? And this whole process needs to be managed. Migration's not going away. People have been moving in search of a better life since we were able to move on 2 feet, and probably even before. And it's a process that needs to be managed. That's the point we're trying to make. Good day.